It was the first week of September when the Harris family moved into their new home, a quiet two-story house in a small Ohio town. For Susan Harris, a single mother of two, the place felt like a new beginning. After a painful divorce, she wanted somewhere peaceful where her kids, 10-year-old Megan and 7-year-old Danny, could feel safe. The house was old but charming. White shutters, a wide porch, and a sprawling backyard where the kids immediately ran to play. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust, the way old homes often do. The realtor had mentioned the place had been vacant for a while, but Susan brushed it off. She was just relieved to finally have a home of her own. But there was one thing she didn't like about the house: the basement. The door to it sat in the narrow hallway between the kitchen and living room. It was painted the same cream color as the walls, but the doorknob was old brass, scratched and dull. The realtor had joked, "Old houses always have spooky basements," before brushing past it. The first night, as Susan was unpacking, she heard it. A low, hollow thud from beneath the floorboards. She froze, listening. Then came another, and another. She told herself it was just the house settling. Old pipes, maybe the water heater. But Megan had noticed too. "Mom," she whispered later that night, "I heard knocking from the basement." Susan forced a smile and tucked her in. "It's an old house, sweetheart, nothing to worry about." For the next few days, the sounds continued. Late at night, always when the house was quiet. Sometimes it was a dull knocking. Other times it was more like scratching. Susan tried to ignore it. Then came the night of September 9th. Susan had just dozed off when she heard Danny screaming. She rushed into his room to find him crying, his small body shaking. "There was a man," he sobbed. "He was standing in my doorway." Susan's heart nearly stopped. She checked the house, every lock, every window. Nothing. She told Danny it must have been a bad dream, but she barely slept after that. The next evening, Susan finally worked up the courage to open the basement door. The smell hit her first. Damp, earthy, like mold and something metallic. The wooden steps groaned as she descended with a flashlight. The basement was unfinished, concrete walls and dirt patches in the corners. Nothing unusual except the door to the basement slammed shut above her. Susan screamed and scrambled back up, yanking it open. Nobody was there. Both kids were upstairs, asleep. Her hands trembled as she locked it. From that night on, she refused to go near it again. But the basement wasn't done with them. On September 14th, Megan woke Susan in the middle of the night. "Mom," she whispered, tears in her eyes, "the basement door is open." Susan's stomach dropped. She grabbed the phone with one hand and a kitchen knife with the other. Sure enough, the door stood wide open, the dark stairwell yawning below. And then they heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs. Susan's shaking hand dialed 911. The operator answered, but before Susan could speak, the footsteps stopped. The basement went silent. When police arrived, they searched every inch. No intruder, no sign of forced entry. But in the dirt on the basement floor, there were footprints, bare, human, leading toward the stairs, but none going back down. The Harrises moved out less than a week later. Susan never told her kids the full truth, but she knew one thing for certain. They hadn't been living alone in that house, and every September, she still dreams of that door creaking open in the dark. The summer was coming to an end when Daniel and his girlfriend Claire decided to spend one last weekend away before the grind of September classes began. They drove 3 hours out of the city to a remote cabin Daniel's uncle owned, tucked deep in the Minnesota woods. The cabin was small and rustic, but it sat right beside a wide, glassy lake. When they arrived, the sun was dipping low and the water reflected fiery streaks of orange and red. It was beautiful, eerily still, with the tree line standing like silent giants around its edges. Claire hugged herself as she stepped out of the car. "It feels too quiet," she said softly. Daniel laughed it off. "That's the point. No traffic, no people, No noise. Just us. That night they cooked over the fire pit and sat by the water, watching the stars scatter across the black sky. Claire eventually loosened up, but she couldn't stop glancing at the lake, as if it were watching her back. Around midnight, as they were heading inside, Daniel noticed something strange. The surface of the lake rippled, not like fish jumping, but wide, circular ripples, as if something massive had just moved beneath. Claire saw it too. She gripped his arm. "Daniel, that wasn't normal." He told her it was probably just a beaver, or maybe the wind, but he couldn't shake the chill that crawled up his spine. The second night was worse. Claire woke Daniel at 2 a.m., her voice trembling. "Do you hear that?" At first he thought it was the wind in the trees, but then he realized it was singing, a soft, melodic humming coming from outside, coming from the lake. Against his better judgment, Daniel peeked through the window. The moon was full, painting the water silver, and there, standing waist-deep in the lake, was a woman. Her hair floated around her like ink. Her dress clung to her body as she swayed. Her face was turned up toward the moon, lips moving in a song he couldn't quite hear. Daniel blinked, and she was gone. The lake rippled once more and returned to stillness. He didn't tell Claire what he saw. The final night, they planned to leave in the morning, but just before dawn, Claire was gone. Daniel shot out of bed, panic crushing his chest. He tore through the cabin, shouting her name, then ran outside. The early fog rolled thick over the lake, but he saw her. Claire walking slowly into the water, her nightgown dragging behind her. "Claire!" he screamed, sprinting toward her. His feet pounded the wet earth, but the closer he got, the further she seemed to drift. By the time he reached the shoreline, she was already chest-deep, and then he saw her face. It wasn't Claire's anymore. The skin was pale, almost bluish, the eyes blank white, her mouth stretched in a wide, haunting smile. She whispered something he couldn't hear, before sinking beneath the surface. Daniel dove after her, clawing at the black water, screaming her name. But there was nothing. The lake swallowed her whole. When search crews arrived later that day, they found no trace of Claire. Not her body, not her clothes, nothing. Daniel tried to explain, but who would believe him? They called it a tragic drowning. But Daniel knows what he saw. Sometimes late at night when he closes his eyes, he still hears the song. Soft, melodic, calling him back to the lake in the woods. When 27-year-old Mark, a software engineer, was settling into his small apartment in Chicago. The city hummed outside, cars honking, distant sirens, but inside, his place was quiet. He worked from home most days, and this particular evening, he was catching up on emails after a long day of debugging code. Around 10:45 p.m., his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He hesitated, but answered. "Hello?" he said. Silence. Then a faint, raspy breathing. Mark frowned, assuming it was a wrong number. "Hey, you've got the wrong number," he said, about to hang up. But then the voice came, clearer this time. "Mark." He froze. The voice was soft, but deliberate. Personal. "How does this person know my name?" "Who is this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. No answer, just more breathing. Uneasy, Mark hung up. He told himself it was a prank, someone dialing random numbers late at night. But the phone rang again, and again, every 5 minutes. Each time the same quiet breathing, the same whisper. Mark. By midnight, his unease had turned to dread. He called his best friend Brian, who laughed. "Probably some kid messing with you. Don't answer it, just ignore it." Mark tried. He left the phone on the table, face down. He tried to sleep, but the feeling of being watched made it impossible. His apartment felt wrong. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. The faint sound of tapping, almost like fingernails drumming on wood, echoed from the hallway. At 3:17 a.m., the phone rang again. He answered on instinct. "Mark," the voice whispered, now closer, urgent. "I'm right outside your door." Panic set in. His hand shook as he dialed 911. He stayed on the line, whispering his address. Police officers arrived within 10 minutes. They searched the apartment. Every room, every corner, nothing. No sign of forced entry. The door was locked from the inside the entire time. The officers reassured him it was likely a prank call or malfunction. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been standing just beyond his bedroom door. Weeks later, Mark discovered an old voicemail he had forgotten to delete. It was from 2 years ago, from a number he didn't recognize. Curious, he played it. A soft, raspy whisper came through. "Mark, I've been waiting for you." Chills ran down his spine. The timestamp read September 7th, 2016. 2 years exactly before the first call that night. Mark moved out the next day. He never used that phone number again. But even now, when he changes apartments or phones, he always triple-checks the locks, triple-checks the windows, and sometimes, late at night, he swears he can hear that same faint whisper echoing in the silence. Mark. When 19-year-old Emily started her new job as a night shift cashier at the local Walmart. She was excited, finally some independence, her first paycheck, and the thrill of being trusted with responsibility. The store was huge, the aisles wide, and by 11 p.m. most of the daytime crowd had disappeared, leaving only a few late-night shoppers wandering slowly between shelves. At first, everything seemed normal. Emily laughed quietly with co-workers, scanned groceries and counted change. But after her second week, she started noticing him. A man, tall, thin, always wearing a dark hoodie, standing in the same aisles she was restocking. He never bought anything. He never spoke. He just watched. At first, Emily thought it was coincidence. Maybe he was just shopping slowly. But every night he seemed to be there, watching her from a distance, blending in with the shadows. One night, while walking to the break room, Emily noticed a folded piece of paper tucked under the locker bench. She picked it up. Her blood ran cold as she read the words, scrawled in messy, jagged handwriting. "You look so much prettier up close." Her hands shook. Heart racing, she ran to the manager, who called store security. They checked the cameras. Nothing. The man never appeared on the footage. Emily tried to calm herself. Maybe it was a prank, someone messing with her. But the feeling of being watched never went away. Every aisle she turned down, she half expected to see him lurking. The following week, she found another note, this time slipped between her cash drawer and the register. "I know when you're alone. I know when you're scared." Panic set in. Emily barely slept, checking every corner of her apartment, locking her doors obsessively. Her co-workers noticed her jumpiness, but she didn't tell anyone the full story. She didn't want anyone to think she was overreacting. Then came the night she quit. The store was nearly empty. She was finishing her shift, bagging the last items, when she glanced up and saw him again. Same dark hoodie, same blank expression. Watching. Standing perfectly still, just a few aisles away. Emily felt her chest tighten. Something deep in her gut told her she couldn't stay another minute. She bolted out of the store, leaving her things behind. Security called after her, but she didn't stop. She never returned. Weeks later, other employees reported seeing shadowy figures lingering in the same aisles at night. Empty aisles. No cameras catching movement. Only fleeting glimpses. A tall, thin man, sometimes watching, sometimes disappearing entirely. Emily's friends still whisper about it. She moved out of town, afraid to leave her apartment at night. And even now she can't help but imagine him, standing silently somewhere in the dark, waiting for her next shift, always watching. Because he wasn't just a man in the store. He was the stalker that no one else could see. Truck driver was making his way through the winding highways of Pennsylvania. He had been on the road for nearly 10 hours, his eyes heavy, his mind buzzing from too much bad coffee. All he wanted was to get to the next town, park his rig and get some rest. The road stretched empty ahead, surrounded by dark forests that seemed to swallow the headlights. He turned up the radio just to fight off the silence. That's when he saw her. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but no. The pale glow of his headlights fell on a young woman standing by the side of the road. She looked maybe 20, her long hair falling over her shoulders, her light blue dress fluttering in the breeze. She wasn't carrying a bag, no purse, nothing, just standing there in the dark, alone. Carl slowed, his heart tugging with both caution and concern. In the 70s, hitchhikers weren't unusual, but something about her made him uneasy. Still, he couldn't bring himself to leave her there. He pulled over, rolled down the passenger window and called out, "You okay, miss? Need a ride?" She looked at him with wide, almost glassy eyes, then nodded. Wordlessly, she opened the passenger door and climbed in. The air grew noticeably colder when she settled into the seat. As he drove, Carl tried to make small talk. She told him her name, Emily, and that she was trying to get home. She gave him an address in a nearby town. Her voice was soft, almost distant, like she was speaking through a fog. For nearly 30 minutes, they drove together. She sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Carl noticed she never once blinked when the headlights of oncoming cars swept across her face. Still, she seemed harmless. He reminded himself maybe she'd just had a rough night. But then, as he turned onto the last stretch of road leading into town, he glanced over to reassure her they were almost there. The seat was empty. Carl slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. The passenger door was still closed. The seatbelt lay neatly buckled where she had been sitting just seconds before. His hands trembled on the wheel. He pulled into the town, found the address she had given, and forced himself to knock on the door. An older couple answered, confusion etched on their tired faces when he asked for Emily. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She told him Emily was their daughter. She had died in a car accident on that very highway, 5 years earlier, in September. She had been wearing a light blue dress when it happened. Carl stood there in stunned silence, his throat dry, the night air pressing in cold against his skin. The couple thanked him quietly before shutting the door, as if this wasn't the first time someone had come with the same story. Driving away, Carl couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep into his bones. To this day, truckers whisper about that stretch of road in Pennsylvania. Every September, someone swears they've seen her, the young woman in the blue dress, waiting for a ride home she'll never finish.